King George Mladenov is arguably the most legendary player to appear on Australian Survivor, and it seems that his 2 seasons of the show were just the beginning of his reality TV career. A political strategist from the Bankstown suburb of Sydney, George burst onto the Australian Survivor scene in 2021's Brains v Brawn season. George played a bombastic game, and he was able to make it to the end, despite being targeted during his entire run. Dubbed a cockroach by his competitors, George made it to the final 2, but he lost the jury vote to Hayley Leake. King George cemented his legacy with his return trip on Australian Survivor, Heroes v Villains in 2023. Even though he entered the game with his notorious reputation as King George of Bankstown from his previous season, George again avoided elimination. He was a dominant force throughout the game. He came just shy of winning again, but his alliance recognized the threat he posed, and eliminated him in 4th place. Australian Survivor's King George will compete on the Amazing Race following his successful run on Heroes v Villains. King George is taking his talents to a different competition series. It was recently announced that George and his sister, Pam, will compete together on the Amazing Race Australia, Celebrity Edition. They will be running the race against several other celebrity teams, including some fellow reality stars, such as Too Hot to Handle's Harry Jowsey and Love is Blind Australia's Teddy Briggs. George won't be the first Survivor standout to compete on the Amazing Race. The American versions of the franchises have frequently had cast members cross over. The closest parallel to George would be Boston Rob Mariano, who dominated the Amazing Race Season 7 with his now wife Amber Mariano, by using his cutthroat survivor mentality. George competitors likely aren't prepared for how talented George is as a strategist and tactician, and it wouldn't be surprising at all if George is able to replicate his Australian Survivor success on the Amazing Race Australia. George Mladenov has a book deal in addition to branching out into other reality competition franchises. George is also working on a new book. In a Heroes v Villains postseason interview on Rob Has a Podcast, George revealed that he'd signed a book deal, and had a relatively short window to complete the manuscript. It's unclear exactly what George's book will cover, but it will likely have something to do with his experiences as a former political strategist. It may include his philosophies on game theory and tactics, which came in handy on Australian Survivor. It's clear that King George Mladenov's appearances on Australian Survivor were the beginning of a long career in the spotlight. George is one of the few Australian Survivor competitors to successfully extend their 15 minutes of fame into other avenues. The show found a huge star in George, and he continues to be in demand following his dominance on Australian Survivor. Sources: The Amazing Race Australia, Twitter, Rob Has a Podcast, YouTube.